let's do business on Business Incorporated. And for this 55 minutes, here are some of the headlines we have prepared for you. In Ghana, the inflation drops for the third consecutive month, is now at 22.4%. And Zambia is bolstering copper exploration ahead of 2031 targets. Overtaking Nigeria, Kenya now becomes Africa's biggest second-hand clothes importer. Welcome to the program. I'm Ini John McQuarrie. The details and a whole lot more, starting from what's happening with oil. Oil prices lost $2 after U.S. President Donald Trump announced reciprocal tariffs on trading partners, and that has stoked concerns about a global trade war that may dampen demand for crude. So we see almost $2, more than 2.5% in just one trading session, 2.63%. at $72.98 a barrel. 2.76% is what WTI shaved off to $69.73 a barrel. Liberation Day was yesterday. President Trump announced the details of that reciprocal tariff on almost all the countries, at least 10%. So both benchmarks settled higher in the previous session, but turned negative over the course of Trump's press conference yesterday, in which he announced a 10% baseline tariff on all imports into the United States. Even friends like the United Kingdom are also hit by this. However, imports of oil, gas, and refined products were exempted from this sweeping tariff, according to the White House. And Trump's tariff policies could stoke inflation, slow economic growth, intensify trade disputes, and there are possibilities that it will weigh down on oil prices, reinforcing bearish sentiment. This is the observation by Energy Information Administration. We also saw that the U.S. crude inventories rose by 6.2 million barrels last week, against what analysts had expected to be a decline of 2.1 million barrels. In Nigeria, the Nigerian National Petroleum Company, the NNPCL, has raised price of petrol to at least 925 naira per litre at various filling stations in Lagos, while it's about 950 for Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. The new prices increased started yesterday, April the 2nd, and marks a 65 naira increase from the previous price of 860 naira per litre in Lagos, and 70 naira increase to 880 previously in the northern part of the country. Industry experts in the oil sector attributing this new price to Dangote's refineries' refusal to continue selling petrol products in naira, closely connected to the non-renewal of the crude for naira policy by the federal government. And in the metal space, gold prices hit a record peak on Tuesday as concerns that United States President's reciprocal tariffs may fuel inflationary pressures and impede economic growth, and that drove safe haven demand. Look at the numbers for this afternoon: $3,148.05 after it went up 0.5%. That's for spot gold. For U.S. gold, 0.2% increase to $3,172.60. Spot silver gained much more than that, 1.5% up at $33.52. Platinum also went up 0.7%, $977.17. Palladium is also up 0.5% to $965.14 a barrel. In the previous session, bullion recorded its strongest quarter since 1986, marking one of the most significant upswings in the precious metals history. President Trump, who sees tariff as a way of protecting the domestic economy from unfair global competition, as he calls it, has promised to unveil a massive tariff plan, and which he dubs, that was what he called yesterday, the Liberation Day. And back to Nigeria, the Central Bank of Nigeria has denied a viral social media report claiming that it has introduced 2 new denominations of the currency, 5,000 and 10,000 for circulation from the 1st of May. The financial market regulator made a clarification in a notice via its official handle X, and the viral circulation, which was falsely attributed to the CBN and widely shared on WhatsApp, had alleged that the Apex Bank planned the introduction of 2 new denominations as part of ongoing efforts to streamline cash transactions and improve liquidity management. Well, the CBN has now come to say that is not a true information. And talking about the tariffs, reaction are still trailing that official announcement by U.S. President Donald Trump for the imposition of tariffs on goods exported into the United States from more than 50 countries around the world, including Nigeria. An economic expert and chief executive officer of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chiku, who was a guest on Business Morning, says the impact is most likely going to be counterproductive for the U.S., as the move could lead other countries to retaliate in ways that would be very unfavorable to the world's biggest economy.
Tariff as it stands today will eventually signpost the beginning of the failing of U.S. or the collapse of U.S. as a leading economic and world power. The simple reason is this. For the first time in the history of the U.S., is picking up fight with even its closest enemies. If you look at that tariff, for instance, you mentioned the tariff on Nigeria, which is inconsequential because Nigeria is a net importer from the U.S., not a net exporter from the U.S. Nigeria's import from the U.S. in the last quarter of last year was about 6.36% of our total import, about 1 trillion naira. But how much does the U.S. currently import from Nigeria? It has actually diminished at a significant level. The U.S. tariff will eventually hurt U.S. and hurt international trade and hurt the friendly countries. Take, for instance, the imposition of tariff, 20% tariff for European Union. European Union is the closest economic ally of the U.S. It also imposed a 24% tariff on South Korea, one of its closest economic allies, and on Japan, and 25% on South Korea. These are countries that the U.S. have had very close formal economic relationship with. In addition to that, of course, China, we can always explain China's case because China is a trade deficit with the U.S. is humongous. I mean, in favor of China. But the 54% tariff on China, and you can be rest assured that these countries are going to retaliate. Of course, there are already statements by world leaders that they are going to reciprocate the reciprocal tariff, because that's what the U.S. president called it, reciprocal tariff. They are going to reciprocate in kind the reciprocal tariffs. So we're going to see a situation where price levels are going to go up in U.S., inflation is going to go up in U.S., possibly unemployment could actually go up, and the intended purpose of driving back manufacturing into the U.S. as well as generating revenue will be defeated.
Well, it does seem that the tariff fever is, well, spreading even into Africa. The Economic Community of West African States is set to hold a meeting later on this month to address the 0.5% import levy recently imposed by the Alliance of Sahel States on goods from ECOWAS member nations. The head of communications for ECOWAS Commission, Joel Akofoji, confirmed this development and says that the Extraordinary Council will convene on April 22 to discuss the matter and other related issues. And this, of course, has elicited some reactions from members of ECOWAS, the possibility of a 0.5% tariff on goods from ECOWAS country.
I would suggest that as an underdog action, the ECOWAS body should initiate a regional committee of people with grand expertise, economic expertise, to itemize these goods that would be affected by the 0.5% tariff and redirect them to the ECOWAS nations. Because I say this because the potentials of economic ECOWAS, the potentials of economic ECOWAS has not been fully harnessed. The ECO should be brought into view should be activated. The eco currency should be activated. Once the eco currency is activated, you would see a stream of activities, a stream of developmental activities taking place across West Africa, across ECOWAS West Africa. You would see a fundamental change, from what the economics of West Africa used to be.
So that's it. Tariff taking over conversations almost everywhere, not just in the Western world, but even right here in Africa. We'll look forward to that meeting on April 26th by ECOWAS Council, and we'll see or hear what the conclusions of how to handle the 0.5 tariff from the Sahel states would look like. Now, away from that, the federal government has planned to ban solar panel imports, and they say it's to drive local production. And this, they say, will accelerate Nigeria's clean energy transition, adding that the country has the capacity to meet its solar energy demands locally. In March, Nigeria's Rural Electrification Agency signed an agreement for a 1.2 gigawatt solar assembly plant, while announcing plans for another 1 gigawatt plant. Well, let's find out from players in the industry, in the energy industry, how they see this, if this is actually an opportunity or a threat to the domestic industry. We have James Fabola. He's the Chief Financial Officer of Energy right here in the studio. Hi, James. Good afternoon. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Ini. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So what's your take on this plan to ban the import of solar panels?
Thank you. I think I can see how someone or a group of people can look at the data shared by MBS that we imported $150 million worth of panels in Q4 last year and think, is there an import substitution opportunity here, right? But that underscores the risk of doing just a top-down analysis and not matching it with a bottoms-up, because you then miss the nuances in the sector, right? Being an operator in our position, we've been excited about the trend over the last 18 to 24 months that have strengthened the value proposition for solar, driven by macro events such as the removal of fuel subsidy, diesel prices being at sustained high levels, and then band aid tariffs, right, despite the unreliability from the grid. So for us and key stakeholders, the key focus we should be obsessing about is driving solar adoption, which is also partly solving what has been a prevalent power problem in the country, instead of potential bottlenecks around trying to encourage the local production capacity of solar panels, which is not a bad idea in itself, but it would be putting the cart before the horse.
So when would you say it would be time to take this kind of a move? Because as you would have noted there, the government is saying, since there is demand now, why don't we then look inwards before the market becomes saturated with imported panels? What's wrong with now? When would be a better time if this is not a good time?
You raise a very valid question. There are three key things to consider. The first question is, what's the installed production capacity in the country today? As far as I know, there are two companies that have recently announced that they have 100 megawatts installed capacity, right? There is no public data around the capacity utilization, but my sense is today it's probably less than 10%. Right, so combined, we're looking at less than 20 megawatts worth of solar panels being produced. There's a report that came out last week that said last year, Nigeria injected an additional circa 70 megawatts of solar into the overall power generation, right? So we're saying today we have less than 10% capacity to meet demand that is growing, right? We're in a space where, like I said, macro events have strengthened the value proposition for solar, and the demand for solar will only continue to increase. If we don't have the local capacity to meet it, then it defeats the purpose. The second thing is cost competitiveness, right? So China today is the predominant source for solar panels globally. Even developed countries like the US import solar panels from China, right? China has gone through a steep learning curve. Solar panel prices have reduced 90% over the last decade, driven by innovation and competition. The question is, can Nigeria compete, given all these factors, as well as factors such as productivity? And if the goal is to drive solar adoption, where one of the biggest challenges so far has been upfront costs, you want to reduce that as much as possible. If we're not able to compete globally, then we'd only be increasing the cost of the overall solar solution, and that would defeat the purpose. The third point is technical capabilities. Like I said, China paid expensive school fees. There were times where a few years ago, solar panels were catching fire, right? It required a lot of innovation, a lot of R&D to get solar panels to the point now where they are safe, more efficient, and their useful lives are as far as 25%. I don't think we're there yet. If you check, a lot of the local producers, they're probably on the path to that, but they do not have the standards that some of the global guys have that would allow them compete and develop solar panels that are of the same quality. So when you think about these three factors, the time isn't now. If you ask me when, I'm not sure, mid to long term. But like I said when I started this conversation, the focus is let's drive solar adoptions. Let's get a lot more panels on the roof. Let's get energy to a point where it's reliable, given that it's fundamental to boosting the economy, creating jobs, and driving overall economic productivity.
So perhaps the government wants to create that necessity. They say necessity is the mother of invention. The China we all run to some years ago, if you saw a China product, in fact, when you said a product was China, then you meant that it was substandard. I mean, but they worked on that, and over time kept making some mistakes and improving on it. So perhaps that's what the government is is building on. Because when you also look at what's happening now, the new reality is a tariff-full world that's out there now. I'm sure you've heard of the announcement from President Donald Trump, and China is going to feel the pinch, and they might likely push it to whoever comes to them. So when you talk about cost, we might actually be facing higher costs out there because of the new order, the tariff, which is taking over the world at this time.
I mean, the tariff discussion is topical, right? As I was waiting to get in here, I saw that a 14% tariff was slapped on Nigeria, right? So it's top of mind for everyone. For us today, we're thinking about the China-Nigeria corridor, which some would argue the tariffs would only strengthen the relationships in Nigeria and China in the short term. But your question obviously is thinking broadly, holistically, right? What that could potentially look like. Because again, nobody is able to predict what could happen in a couple of years. That being said, what some of us are advocating for is not do not put in any endeavor to local production, is there has to be a balance. Energy is in a position where we have supported local producers. We're already patronizing some of the local producers locally. But we know, without bad-mouthing them, some of their shortcomings, which they've also been candid about.
So can't it be worked on? Can't we, for instance, phase out and say, okay, this company is good with this part of the panel, so let's do this with this company, instead of just giving, opening the floor for international competition, which may not help us in the long term, because we still need to develop our domestic industry.
That is what we're doing. But if you think about it only from the standpoint of protectionist policies protecting local producers, you're sort of insulating them from their development. They also need exposure, right? They need to see what sort of products are they competing against. They need to learn what the benefits are of procuring from China today versus theirs. And then gradually, they can meet those standards. It's not a 6-month journey, it's not a 12-month journey. It's a journey that will take time. It took China decades to get here. First of all, we need to learn how they got here, right? And then we start to implement that gradually, and then businesses like us will continue to support them. Because while obviously I started with the cost argument, there is a benefit to having local producers who can supply panels locally. There is the 3-month lag where everything from China takes 3 months. So I do see the benefit of increasing local capacity. But when you think about it from a broad standpoint, the overall net impact of renewable energy, if we slam the door shut to importation of solar panels today, it could have, at risk of sounding alarmist, catastrophic consequences on the renewable energy sector.
So what for you would be the ideal situation of finding a balance between sustaining the adoption at a cost-friendly level and still giving room for the locals to also develop their capacity? Yeah,
that's a great question. And I think what is underpinned by that question is these are not mutually exclusive scenarios. You can incentivize local production without...
What kind of incentive?
Tax incentives, pioneer status, right? You can do that. Setting import waivers on some of their inputs. while still allowing for importation of solar panels to fulfill the overall demand. And then you can gradually start to have more stringent policies on imports while continuing to encourage local production. I think what a lot of operators are kicking against is the abrupt shutdown of importation, and then we wake up the next day and we're like, how do we meet the growing demand? Don't forget that we're also not functioning in isolation. We're part of a broader global solar ecosystem, right? There are players like the World Bank who have committed $750 million to a grant program to boost solar adoption. They will have a thing or two to say about potentially shutting the doors on solar importation and the impact on that on their overall economic, social, and environmental targets, which are very important.
Well, good enough. This is a proposal by the government, and we do hope that with conversations like this, governments perhaps will incorporate more with stakeholders like yourself and others and come to a better arrangement that'll be good for the country. Thank you so much for your time. James Fabola, the Chief Financial Officer of ANUJ. Thank you very much for having me. Take care. Let's take a break now. When we come back, Anita will be here with the market numbers to stay with us here on Business Incorporated. Welcome back. Still watching Business Incorporated here on Channels Television. We head to the markets now, where we'll see if the tariff have also brought the house down. There with Aditi Edit. Anita, what has the tariff done to you and your markets?
Well, good afternoon, Nini. For the stock market, you know, it's not an export index or
exchange. That's the NGX, that's Nigeria stock market. Exactly. Because others have direct impacts from the announcements of yesterday. I think like South Africa also, and then Europe and all of that. China, India, Middle East, most of the markets, you know, most of them have that exposure to the American market, particularly because you know, they have lots of commodities across the mining sector, the auto sector, especially
even some
the auto sector. Yeah, exactly.
So, but that impact was largely felt by Johannesburg Stock Exchange there, which we see, if you take a look at it there, it tanked. Yesterday, I was talking about the 90,000 points that the markets...
That's a dream now, far away.
Exactly. Shaving almost 5%. That's about a 4.25% shaved off. But let's talk more about Nigeria stock market before we head to Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Take a look at the board there. But this is the opening for the month of April, and starting off with the month of with the second quarter, tad 0.2%. That's about just about 90.7 billion naira in our own currency terms. But in dollar value, well, it's just a matter of conversion. But you get that. But this is how the market turned out. But this is not as a result of the tariff. This is actually no thanks to profit taking on the shares of, we had the shares of Orlando, Fresco Holding, as well as some other 27 other stocks, which dented the opening following the resumption from the Eid al-Fitr holiday by investors and traders from the stock markets. Like I mentioned, South Africa's stock exchange all-share index at intraday down by 4.25%, and this is because that sweeping global trade tariff, which has affected more than 100 countries around the world, announced by Donald Trump. Some call it the merciless tariff, announced by Mr. Tariff himself, Donald Trump. So the impact is felt across South Africa, which is a major exporter to the U.S. for automobile products, mineral products, agricultural products, as well as machinery products, you know, because this has you have all of them, most of the mining sector stocks as well as the automobile stocks are there, but we'll get to that first. But let's just talk about the markets here. So it's just a negative sentiment for the markets that we track at intraday. Okay, for the Egyptian Stock Exchange, also red is the color for most of the market. It's just by fair chance that you get to see a green color there. EGX 1.10% down at intraday, while for the close of Wednesday's trading session, so the Nairobi Stock Exchange was manageably, just didn't feel much heat from there, but that was for the close of Wednesday's trading session. So we'll look out for how that market would open and close for Thursday. Okay, so now let's move over to the Middle East, where the Middle East, we see that it's not so much a different picture there. The Middle East, the Dubai, both markets on the United Arab Emirates in the red, more than 1%, nearly 1% for the Abu Dhabi and the Dubai index. Let's take a look at the Saudi Arabia and the Qatari Stock Exchange. Only the Qatari Stock Exchange index was green at intraday by about 0.46%. As you can see there, 10,232.95. And for the Tadawul, just a little bit going into the 12,000, but that dream has not been realized because that's 1% has pulled back the market from the 12,000 points which we saw initially. Okay, so now let's talk more about Nigeria's markets. At this time, we're looking at the Forex market. Yesterday, we were talking about the fixed income, but let's take a little bit deeper look into the the Forex market and a little bit of the fixed income markets. And we have Ebube Uneze, a Forex dealer with Access Bank, to tell us more about this and what to expect, especially within this tariff era that we're in. Thank you for joining us, Ebube.
Thank you for having me, Annette. It's good to see you and a happy new month.
Happy new month. Okay, so now it's everywhere. I think this is just the #1 story on the lips across all markets, even crypto markets. But you were talking about the crypto, the Forex market. Now, this tariff announcement by Donald Trump, what impact could it have on Nigeria's fixed income market, in particular when you look at the Forex markets?
All right, thank you very much for having me. So yesterday, we saw the Trump administration announce a blanket reciprocal tariff on several trading partners of the U.S., and this has far-reaching implications for several countries. For the Nigerian fixed income space, there's a possibility that the global risk-off sentiment could result in a potential outflow of capital from our local fixed income securities to safe haven assets such as gold, yen, and euro, as we are beginning to see investors avoid U.S.-denominated assets as countries and investors begin to look at ways to decouple from the U.S. economy. So we expect that, or the general expectation is that we may begin to see outflow of capital from our fixed income market, and that will also be having impact on the FX market. However, this will largely be mitigated if the central bank continues to maintain its hawkish stance and ensuring that investors continue to get those attractive yields on local fixed income securities.
Okay, so now in about 2 weeks less from now, we will be expecting the March inflation numbers to come in, and that has a way of affecting both the fixed income market in particular. But what are your expectations, particularly in the month of April and the second quarter, for inflation and other factors that might affect the fixed income and the Forex markets?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. So last month we saw inflation figures taper down from January figures. However, for this month, there are some inflationary drivers which have a potential to either keep inflation sticky, and this is particularly on energy prices. So we saw the Dangote refinery announce over last month that they were going to suspend selling petroleum products to Nigerian marketers in Naira as a result of the suspension of the Naira for crude deal with the NNPC. As such, in most of the pump stations today, we are seeing PMS retail at 930 Naira to a liter, an uptick from the 860, 880 Naira to a liter levels. So this has the potential to drive inflation up. We also note that there's a potential, as we are just coming out from the long Ramadan season, and as such, farming activities was a bit reduced. So this also has a potential to also result in higher inflation figures. So our expectations for inflation figures going into the month of April is that they should be sticky, and as such, we still expect the central bank to not take to not turn its stance to a dovish stance. As such, they will still slightly keep rates elevated as they continue to watch those inflation numbers and see how they impact. In terms of the impact of the global tariff saga on Nigeria, we don't expect to see a lot of pass-through effect to the Nigerian economy. but we'll still continue to watch this space and see how the central bank continues to respond to it. But the general short-term expectation is that rates, money market rates, will continue to be at elevated levels. On the FX market, general expectation is that we should have a relatively stable month, especially against the backdrop of the announcement by the central bank of the net foreign exchange reserve numbers for 2024. That has, in a sort of way, put a lot of silence to a lot of the chatter around the net foreign exchange numbers for the central bank. So we expect that these developments should result in a largely stable month in the FX market this month.
Okay, so now I'm glad you mentioned that foreign exchange, the exchange rate and the performance. But we would like to know at intraday, as I have it now, the dollar index has fallen to a 5-month low. So what is the intraday activities for the fixed income market and the forex market? How are they responding to this drop in the dollar index?
Thank you very much for that question. So in the FX markets, we are still seeing rates are still hovering around between 1530, 1540 levels, and there's been relative stability. We are not seeing a lot of volatility on the spot FX market. In terms of the dollar index, while that is an indication of an appreciation of other currencies against the dollar, and this is as a result of the tariff announcement by the Trump administration. For Nigeria, what it has done for us is that we've seen relative stability and a slight appreciation. Opening the day yesterday, from the trading session, we saw the Naira appreciate a bit from last week levels to 1529 levels, and this morning or today intraday is hovering around 1530, 1535 levels. So we'll continue to watch these developments and see how the market reacts to some of these data as it comes through.
Thank you so much for that analysis on the show. And of course, this tariff, I just hope it doesn't go as worse than we expect, but that's just an expectation. Thank you so much for your time on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
That was Ebube Uneze giving us details for the fixed income markets at intraday and what to expect in the second quarter. Okay. Now we're still talking about that Trump tariff announcement. Take a look at it. More than 180 countries and territories are facing this reciprocal levies. We call it tariff. We had been mentioning tariff on the side of electricity, but this time, this is the one that is riveting across every market. Call it crypto, call it mining, call it automobile, call it just about anything. Even commodities has been affected. So now the European Union is also vowing to roll out some countermeasures. They're planning to hold talks with the United States. That's one of their partners, but this time they're not immune to this to the tariff announcement by Donald Trump, and there's also a fear of a tariff trade war. So this is just one of the consequences. China, which is also I might call China the #1 economy, but China, well, is also trying to fight back this tariff, threatening a reciprocal tariff by the U.S. And then take a look at it. All the markets are also reacting. Asia Pacific, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, as well as markets across the European Union. It's not too much of a good news. I would have given you the details, but it's not. I think your guess would be as good as mine.
Yes, well, Anita, we've been seeing the red color everywhere, thanks to Mr. Trump's tariff.
Mr. Tariff.
Yes, and it's going to be a conversation at least for today and a couple of days to come. But I mean, there's also the note that. Well, there's still room for negotiations, perhaps, because it's supposed to start all through till next week. So we'll see, perhaps, if Mr. Trump will show mercy. I see one of your slides there say, analysts say that it's a merciless...
They call it the merciless
tariff. Maybe a bit of mercy will come in for close-knitted countries like the United Kingdom and great alliances like South Korea and all of that. So we'll just watch the space, and of course our job is to continue to report it and analyze possible impacts of it.
And I'm sure the world might be, the world might be so glad to see Mr. Trump maybe back down. But he says he's doing this in a bid to protect the American economy, because he says it's a declaration of economic independence. And he insists that after decades of unfair practices, that it's high time that Liberation Day.
So that's why yesterday was Liberation Day for the United States. Thank you so much, Anita.
Pleasure.
Well, we're still on the White House announcement of those tariffs, 20% on EU exports to the United States. So unlike a country like Nigeria, this is going to have direct and heavy impacts on the economy. Let's have Chiponda Chimbelu now tell us the conversations that have been going on after this. Hi, Chip. Good afternoon. So we expected this. We watched out for it at 9 p.m. and then we heard it. So what's the latest reaction to this announcement on tariff?
Well, Ini, good afternoon. And yes, it was expected, however, it was still surprising. And I think, judging by the reaction, that is the clear case. There's criticism from pretty much every European capital. And there was one response that I want to point to, and that was from Brussels. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us. And that was, of course, from the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Now, she said that Brussels will respond with countermeasures next week, while adding that the bloc is still ready to negotiate. So there's clearly disappointment from Brussels, despite the fact that this was expected. Now, the tariffs, of course, bring more uncertainty to the global economy, and the United States is, of course, and the EU are, of course, the biggest trade partners of each other. Trade in goods is valued at nearly $1 trillion, and of course, the EU accounts for around a fifth of total U.S. trade. Now, these tariffs could, of course, potentially have EU exports to the United States, according to an estimate by Bloomberg Economics. And of course, that is without taking into consideration what the European Union's countermeasures will be, Ini. So more could be happening, of course.
Yeah, maybe you should give us a little bit of hints on what that countermeasure may be. I hope it's not going to be higher tariff, because the world is going to feel the pinch even more.
Well, I do wish I had a crystal ball that could help us know what the response will be, because, of course, that is the question on everybody's minds right now, Ini. But we do know that the European Union will be voting on countermeasures on steel and aluminum tariffs on Wednesday next week. And of course, the European Union is under pressure to respond. And it is hard to look at trade on its own right now, because of course, Washington is also negotiating with Moscow on how to end that war in Ukraine, and Brussels doesn't have a seat at that table. Now, judging by the leaked messages, of course, from that signal chat from between high-ranking members of the Trump administration, it showed that, of course, the U.S. government believes that European countries are freeloaders. Now, of course, how Brussels responds now is an opportunity for the bloc to show that it also has muscle that it can flex. Now, the question, of course, is whether the 27 EU member states can get behind one response that serves the entire bloc and not individual interests of its different members. And of course, the Trump administration may try to exploit any cracks by negotiating with countries individually. So, of course, we have to be watching to see whether the EU countries do stick together in their response to the US's reciprocal tariffs.
Yeah, that's always the question, sticking together and having the same view. And well, let's hope that it will be one voice at this time. So I don't know if I need to ask. I know the stocks are responding negatively to this since yesterday.
Yes, it's red across the board, of course. That has been said earlier on the show already. European shares, too, are tumbling. Now, investors, of course, hadn't been expecting the reciprocal tariffs to come in as high as they have. And the Euro Stoxx 600 is down more than 2%. And, of course, there are now more heightened fears about an all-out trade war, that will, of course, drive the global economy into recession. Now, Germany's finance minister, Robert Habeck, he did warn that it wasn't Liberation Day, but Inflation Day. And, of course, that doesn't just apply to the United States, but also potentially the more than 180 countries and territories targeted by the U.S.'s reciprocal tariffs. Now, the punitive measures, of course, will pretty much drive up the cost of doing business and producing goods across the entire world. So it is bad news for the global economy, and we all have to be watching out for those reciprocal tariffs, Ini.
Yeah, I guess we should term April 2nd not Liberation Day, but Inflation Day. Unfortunately, we would remember this for a long time, Chip.
Yes, we will.
All right, do take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Likewise.
Now let's come to Africa, and we start from Ghana, where the annual consumer inflation rate has declined for the third consecutive month, reaching 22.4% in March 2025 from 23.1% in February. This is according to the Ghana Statistical Service. The decline is attributed to easing food price pressures. In March, food inflation fell sharply to 26.5% from 28.1% in February, while non-food inflation registered a marginal decline from 18.8% to 18.7%. Inflation for locally produced foods also dropped from 25.1% to 24%. However, the inflation rate for imported items inched up slightly to 18.7% from 18.5% in the previous month. The easing of inflation comes just days after the Bank of Ghana made a surprise move by raising its benchmark interest rate by 100 basis points to 28%. The central bank justified the hike, emphasizing the need for a tight monetary policy stance to bring inflation further under control. And talking about food now, let's discuss rice. The price of a 50 kg bag of rice has dropped significantly in Nigeria by 35%, from 140,000 in October to 90% in March. Although rice is a seasonal commodity, prices typically surge during the festive period, followed by a decline as demand decreases. Additionally, global price of rice has also fallen 5.91%. Reaching $13.19 per metric tons. What are the factors driving this? Is this decline sustainable? We have this conversation now with Toju Megson. He's an analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Hi, Toju, good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Good afternoon, Annie. Thank you for having me.
Great. So do we see this decline in price of rice sustainable for Nigeria especially?
Yes, in the meantime, especially due to the fact that globally the trend of rice right now is that the price for rice is actually decreasing. So that would mean import costs will go down for the price of rice. Relatively in regards to like domestic production of rice, I feel the price reducing right now is due to the fact that we're facing post-festive demand decline at the moment, which is led by, obviously, the festive period we just experienced during December. So the hike in the price over the ember months of last year, from October, when the prices went up to 140,000, was due to the fact that, obviously, suppliers are trying to accommodate for the demand that they will experience due to the high increase in consumption around that time. So now we're facing a period where there's a decreased demand for rice due to the reduction in consumption as December has passed on. So now these suppliers have to accommodate for this reduction in consumption and reduce their prices.
So that sounds like temporal factors. Just demand has dropped and the festive season is over and all. How much impact can we say that the government's policies and programs on rice, how much impact can we say they've done, to the supply and
the government has definitely tried to have an impact on this in terms of helping out agriculturally, giving the farmers the appropriate tools to adequately farm their crops. They could definitely, I feel there could be better interventions and better policies implemented to further aid these farmers to adequately grow their crops. But again, there are also counteractive measures that aren't really related to the government that do have an effect on the overall performance of the GDP growth in agriculture. And that has to do with growing concerns of these farmers. Obviously, there's insecurity amongst farmers right now with the herdsmen and the farmers, the battle that's going on, you call it. So there's a growing concern for their safety and protection of their crops, which obviously leads to a reduction in the output that they produce. Another non-governmental factor would be the climate change. The unpredictable rainfall. As we all know, as you're growing crops, you need to have adequate weather to obviously foster these crops and to grow them to optimal level. So, yeah.
All right, so in all of this, what do we see as the future trend for rice demand, especially in the country? Because at a point where the price ticked up, it does seem like some individuals sought for alternatives. Can we expect them to be back to consuming rice or to stay with these alternatives?
You're right, as obviously the price hiked up, we've seen people going for other alternatives such as noodles, pasta, in that sense, relatively cheaper goods. Again, this is obviously due to consumer preference, shift in consumer preference as to going for a relatively cheaper option. As we all know, the average Nigerian's income right now is a bit constrained. So you would tend to see people switch back to rice if they're avid rice consumers. But also, don't be surprised if you see people refraining from going back to rice and sticking with the alternative that they found, just due to the fact that when you're consuming rice, the price of rice is not the only factor. You have to also think about the complementary goods that come along with eating rice, like stew, tomatoes, the gas that you're going to use to cook rice. And when you compare that to the alternatives such as pasta and noodles, they take a quicker time to cook. You normally would eat noodles on its own or with egg, which is relatively cheaper than to buying tomatoes, beef, and other complementary goods that you eat with rice.
All right, Toju, thank you so much for your perspective. Toju Megasin is an analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Looking at some other parts of Africa now, Zambia has launched a series of strategic initiatives to accelerate copper drilling and meet its target of producing 3.1 million tons per annum by 2031. In February, the country introduced the Zambia Integrated Mining Information System, a digital platform designed to enhance efficiency and transparency in mining license management. The system is expected to streamline the approval process and help Zambia attract more investors, as well as fast-track exploration to create more conducive environment for copper drilling. Zambia is implementing several government-led initiatives to achieve this. Kenya has claimed the title of Africa's largest importer of second-hand clothing, you know, the Okrika here in Nigeria. They've overtaken Nigeria in this and other top importers in the continent. According to data from Observatory of Economic Complexity, Kenya imported used clothes and textiles valued at 38.5 billion shillings. That's about 298 million naira. Dollars, I beg your pardon, in 2023. That's up 12.45% from 34.28 billion shillings the previous year. This leap has pushed Kenya past Nigeria, a nation with a population that's more than 4 times of Kenya's population. They now lead the continent, and they call it Mutumba. That's what Kenya calls Okrika. In 2022, Kenya and Nigeria were nearly tied, with imports hovering around 34.5 billion Kenyan shillings, while South Africa followed with 33.8 billion shillings. By 2023, Kenya surged ahead. Ghana climbed to second with 30.4 billion, and South Africa, Uganda, and Nigeria trailed behind. So, for once, perhaps Nigeria will be happy that they're being overtaken in this, the importation of second-hand clothing. The winner for the continent is Kenya. Let's go to the crypto space now and see what's happening over there. So yesterday we had a bit of green, but expectedly with President Trump's announcement, the color is red. There you have it. It's red for today. Bitcoin has dropped from 84 we had about 24 hours ago to 82,946 0.13, and that's down 2.18%. I'm sure because the shock has already been priced in. I'm sure it should have been more than this. If we see what's happening to the stock markets and around the world. But crypto has a bit of shock and has priced some of that in, so we see a loss of that. Ethereum is also in the green. Notice Ethereum has gone down. It's been in more of 1,800 in the last couple of days, but it's dropped there. So it's 1,797, lost 3.73%. BNB, XRP, TRX, everybody is reacting to President Trump's announcement yesterday. But let's look at other trending stories in that space. We can tell you that crypto lost $100 billion, and Bitcoin, that's the market cap, dropped 3.3%, falling from 2.88 trillion to 2.78 trillion after that announcement by President Donald Trump. So lost $100 billion. That's investors' money right there. But I mean, every market has recorded some losses. Also, the crypto market took a major hit after that. Of course, ETF inflows hit 220 million. After that announcement to wiping out 507 million in value. That's for the ETF inflow also yesterday. Ethereum saw that now about 1,700. Ethereum's active addresses declined sharply also since the beginning of the year, dropping around 525,000 to approximately 333,000. This decline has coincided with weakening price trend, stabilizing around 1,008, but now 1,007 is what we see. The sustained decrease in activity highlights notable reduction in user engagement, that's Ethereum, and transactional volume across the network. So let's find out what Gilbert thinks about this, if he saw this coming. Hi, Gilbert. Good afternoon and welcome to the program.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ms. Ini. Great to be here.
Yeah, so, I mean, everybody, were you shocked? Or, I mean, we have been talking about it for a while, so is it what you expected?
Okay, you know, I think that the outcome of yesterday's tariff announcement was expected, and also the drawdown that happened as well was also expected, but it's more of a question of is this the drawdown everyone was waiting for, or is this just the beginning of more drawdown? Because yesterday's tariff announcement turned out to be more like, you know, a declaration of economic independence, which Donald Trump tagged Liberation Day. And I think that there were a couple of key components of the announcement, which I think that every investor should pay attention to. First of all is the universal tariff, which has about a 10% tariff on all imported goods entering the United States. And also a reciprocal tariff for countries that reciprocated. And also, at the end of the day, you know, there are consequences for these actions, which means there are some countries that will negotiate. There will also be some countries that will retaliate. But at the end of the day, these are inflationary action. But the tariff is already working. Like some companies are already thinking of relocating back to the United States to manufacture their goods at the end of the day. And if you notice, the people who are complaining more about this tariff is more of financial market players and not actually workers in the United States, which tells us those who will benefit from what is going on. But I think that yesterday's decision was quite a hard one for Donald Trump, because he was caught in between financial market players who were making a lot of noise because there are mixed reactions about the tariff, and then also doing the right thing. Because if you look, Donald Trump has more of an American first, you know, mindset. I'm not an American, but if you look that he has more nationalist policies and then agenda, then you understand that for the longer term, this is going to build a stronger American economy. But on the short term, it's going to create the kind of outcome we're having on the stock market and also the cryptocurrency market. But then I think it's time that rate starts getting caught at the end of the day.
Oh, so Gilbert, you do agree that yesterday was actually Liberation Day for the U.S.?
Okay, I missed what you just said.
I said you do agree with President Trump that yesterday was actually Liberation Day for the United States.
Okay, that was what Donald Trump calls it. But then when you look at what it means, this is more like the United States. Yes, that's what Donald Trump calls it. When you look at the fact that he wants, if they want Donald Trump to stop increasing tariff, then they should start producing goods in the United States and not sending it out to a different country, which will also send jobs out of the United States. All Donald Trump is saying is, look, we want our goods to be produced and manufactured here in the United States. We want our capitalists to be headquarters here in the United States. We cannot send our economy to different countries. All he's saying is, look, produce, manufacture here in the United States, employ United States citizens. Let our economy grow from here and let us not transfer it to other countries.
All right.
And he's just simply discouraging, people manufacturing outside the United States.
All right, Sir Gilbert, thank you so that. But the balance to that is the U.S. companies went outside because of cheap labor. So when you bring them in and you're sending the migrants out, then where's the cheap labor in there? But I mean, that's a conversation for another day. Thank you so much, Gilbert Jokpata, for your perspective on the program.
All right, thanks for having me.
So that's how much we can take on the program. I do wish we could continue on that conversation, but I think we'll push on that on another episode of either Business Morning or Business Incorporated. But for now, we draw the curtain to say thank you so much for being a part of Business Incorporated. I'll see you at 10 p.m. to see how the market, the NGX, closes today. And then we'll do the circle again tomorrow. I'm Ini John Mekwa. Bye-bye.